Welcome back to the Independent Republic of Mike Graham. I'm delighted to say that we're now joined by John McDonnell, Shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer. John, very good morning to you. Happy Friday, I suppose. And I thought, as I was on my way in to talk to you, I thought we'd already done the final John McDonnell Shadow Chancellor interview, but we get to do a bonus one.
I stand down tomorrow.
Yes.
Only another 24 hours.
Just another 24 hours, yeah. And I mean, it's been a weird couple of weeks, I suppose would be the best way to describe it. But we seem to be kind of slowly but surely, making our way towards something, don't we?
Yeah. This crisis has hit us, and lessons are being learnt, and they're having to be learnt pretty quickly on all the economic front. I've been working with the government, constructive engagement, trying to make sure that we work cross-party. As issues come up, address them effectively. I've been a bit critical at times because I think it's not party political. You have to be honest about things. And at times the government has been behind the curve. And I think on a couple of issues they still are. But to give them their due, Matt Hancock, when he was interviewed last night, acknowledged on the financial side our input had been listened to, and thanked the Labour Party for that. So I'm hoping that the Chancellor now, in his announcements today, will try and plug some of the gaps in the support scheme, because there's no doubt about it. There's a lot of people out there who are being laid off from work and without adequate financial support. Some of them not being covered by the support schemes the government's put forward, and a lot of particularly self-employed that are really on the edge at the moment and need some support. And so they're the big gaps that there are in the system.
Yeah, we've heard from a few people this week who have been exactly in that spot, saying that, they've not been able to do any work for a couple of weeks, and yet they're looking at a situation where they can't get any money till June. That's going to have to be fixed, isn't it?
Got to be. It's got to be. The Chancellor today is going to look at the way in which loans that he promised are going to be delivered, because last week, this is about 8 or 9 days ago, I and a number of MPs across all political parties raised in Parliament the fact that he'd promised loans to small businesses and others, and they weren't getting through. There's been 130,000 applications, only 900 of them dealt with. He's now going to broaden that and try and increase the effectiveness of that loan scheme. Thank goodness. We gave him some advice on how to do that, and so did the Federation of Small Businesses and the CBI and the trade unions. So he's listened a bit on that, but he needs to go much further. There are just too many people at the moment who are being laid off, put onto sick pay, which is still just over £94, and you can't live off that. Matt Hancock acknowledged that. Lots of people who've been new starters in their jobs since the scheme was the start date of the scheme was February the 28th, not announced until March 20th. Those people who took jobs on after the 20th or were offered jobs are not included. And I didn't think there'd be that many, but I'm finding there's hundreds of thousands of people. In terms of those who started their business since last April, they're not covered either. So there's a whole series of gaps, like seasonal workers, people who, for example, foster carers, we're not sure that they're actually covered. So there's a whole range of people like that. Finding a lot of freelancers, particularly in media and in the cultural sector, not covered. So we're saying to them, and I've submitted a number of papers over the last week to him, identifying the particular gaps, saying to him, you need to get on the case on that quickly, because people need money in their banks or in their pockets, because I think people are struggling to survive.
Well, people are. And I wonder if we can come at it from the opposite side as well, with some companies that are not behaving perhaps as they ought to. I mean, could we not get some sort of holiday for people who are having to pay energy bills, which are very high in this day and age? Maybe even phone companies, certainly train companies who have taken people's money for a season ticket, but for those people who aren't able to use that train anymore. And we heard of a terrible story yesterday, John, of Welcome Break, one of the motorway service stops, charging lorry drivers £28 to stay there overnight, where they need to stay in isolation while they're delivering stuff around the country. I mean, I just think that's pretty awful, and they should be surely waiving those kinds of fees, shouldn't they?
Well, first they name and shame them. If there are people out there, organisations or companies, profiteering at a time like this, we should name and shame them. That's the first thing.
Well, that's what I'm going to do.
You're right. Well, that's what I've been doing as well. And also those companies that are still operating, that are not essential, and they're still putting their workers at risk as well. Not introducing sanitisation, not having proper social distancing. Some construction sites around the country have been appalling, and where some good companies have said we've shut down the sites because we can't protect our workers' health. Others have operated and continue to operate. And also, I've had lots of people contact me who've been saying, I've been forced into work. What do I do? Because I need the income. I can't get it. But those ones who, I think there's a very good point. I've been doing a survey amongst Labour MPs all around the country saying, what are your constituents telling you? But also, I've been having 800 to 1,000 emails a day. People contacting me saying, this is what's happened to me. A lot of them saying, I'm being hit by high bills, energy bills in particular. What really worried that their next bill for energy, because they're stuck at home, in isolation, in the lockdown, their energy bill is going to hit them. We've been saying to the government, I put a paper into the government last Friday about how we need to ensure that people's bills are either they get proper support on that, but at least we stop any disconnections. It's the same with rents and evictions, etc. But I think there's a large number of people who will need financial support because, as you say, the bills are going to hit them.
Yes.
We've said to the government as well that on council tax, for example, there has been a hardship fund given to local authorities, but it's 500 million goes nowhere near from what I'm hearing is needed. So there needs to be a bit better planning. As I say, the government's been behind the curve on a number of issues, but I'm hoping they're quickly learning the lessons. The announcement today will go a bit further, but there needs to be another package brought forward urgently next week to deal with this range of matters. Now we know what people are experiencing, and there's such a good feedback from people now in their different circumstances. We can plug those gaps, but it does need the government to be a bit more fleet of foot, if you like, in terms of addressing them.
But they have been faced and charged with a massive amount of work to be done, and we know from historically the civil service doesn't exactly move quickly. So they've done an awful lot of things in the last sort of month or two that would normally take about 3 years.
Well, true. I'm not criticising the civil service at all. I have been dealing with them. I had telephone conferences with civil servants in the Treasury and Cabinet Office last week, and we've been liaising with them within the last 24 hours, as I said, submitting papers, etc. But there has to be better political direction. When it comes down to it, the civil servants that I'm talking to, actually, there's a large number of young, bright people who are really getting on with it, but some of the older hands as well have, I think, giving some really good guidance about how things can be implemented, but it does need political direction. So what I'm saying to Rishi Sunak and others is, look, we now know where the gaps in your schemes are. Don't leave it till next week or the week after. Get on with it now and plug those gaps, because a lot of it is simply about making sure, for example, the banks deliver, because they haven't been up until now, making sure that individual companies are properly monitored. Sometimes, we're urging the voluntary action. I think there needs to be a lot more direction and some enforcement as well on some of this.
Okay. A final question for you, John, because this is your final day as the Shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer, also Jeremy Corbyn's final day as leader of the Labour Party. Like you, I'm not being critical particularly or being negative, but it's going to be difficult for Jeremy Corbyn's sort of leadership reign to be remembered for something other than the anti-Semitism problem that the Labour Party still has.
Well, I'm hoping we've demonstrated that actually we've been able to rise to it and deal with it. I was talking, interestingly enough, I'm amazed that you raised it today, but interestingly enough, I was speaking to one of our Jewish party members yesterday who's been involved in touring around constituencies to train people on anti-Semitism. And actually, I think the mechanisms that we've put in place now, and I was very critical of the party from the beginning, saying they weren't fast enough or ruthless enough about dealing with it. I think the mechanisms we're putting in place now is that's happening. The training's taking place as well. They're much quicker at kicking people out once they've identified any anti-Semitic behaviour. I'm hoping that becomes a lesson for other political parties, because it's not just anti-Semitism, there's Islamophobia in other political parties as well. I'm hoping we've learnt that lesson and we can move on. But yes, it has been a stain. There's no doubt about it. We should have dealt with it faster. We should have been more ruthless, but lessons have been learned. And I'm hoping we can move on now and become the anti-racist party that we've always been, leading the struggles against anti-racism in our society. And unfortunately, it's still there. And it's anti-Semitism, Islamophobia and other forms of racism. that still unfortunately infect our community that we've got to tackle.
John, thanks very much.